locked room, 2 mutilated bodies. What kind of crime could leave the police completely baffled? This is Midnight Corridor. Tonight we are going to read The Murders in the Rue Morgue by Edgar Allan Poe. In the dimly lit streets of Paris, where the flickering gas lamps cast long shadows and the boundary between reason and madness grows thin, there existed a mind unlike any other, a mind capable of penetrating the deepest mysteries that baffled ordinary men. This was the mind of Chevalier Auguste Dupin, a name that would forever be etched in the annals of criminal investigation as the progenitor of all analytical detectives to come. Born to an illustrious family that had seen better days, Dupin was a creature of the night, a phantom of intellect who prowled the forgotten corners of the Faubourg Saint-Germain. Our first meeting occurred under the most peculiar circumstances, in an obscure library where we both sought the same rare volume. From that moment, an unbreakable bond formed between us, and I became the chronicler of his extraordinary exploits. Dupin's residence was a time-worn mansion of grotesque grandeur, its decaying splendor a perfect reflection of his own eccentric genius. There, amidst piles of books and the perpetual haze of tobacco smoke, he would spend his days in profound meditation, emerging only when the sun had set to walk the labyrinthine streets of Paris, his sharp eyes missing nothing. What distinguished Dupin was not merely his power of observation, but his preternatural ability to reconstruct entire trains of thought from the barest fragments of evidence. I shall never forget the evening when, after 15 minutes of perfect silence, he suddenly interrupted my musings with the remark, "You are right about the epilogue. It would indeed be more effective in the minor key." He had deduced not only that I was thinking of the musical composition we had heard earlier, but had followed every twist and turn of my reflections upon it. This remarkable faculty, which he termed ratiocination, enabled him to solve problems that left the official police utterly confounded. While they bustled about collecting obvious clues, Dupin would sit motionless for hours, his mind working with the precision of a master watchmaker until the truth stood revealed before him in all its terrible simplicity. The Parisian police, with their crude methods and dogged adherence to routine, were a perpetual source of amusement to Dupin. "They collect facts," he would say, "but they cannot interpret them. They measure the shadow, but cannot calculate the substance that casts it." His contempt for their procedures was matched only by his pity for their limitations. Yet for all his brilliance, Dupin remained an enigma even to me, his closest companion. There were depths to his character that no plumb line could sound, moments when his eyes would take on a faraway look as if contemplating mysteries beyond mortal comprehension. It was in this old house, on a particularly gloomy autumn evening, with the wind howling through the chimney like a banshee, that Dupin first heard of the atrocities in the Rue Morgue, crimes so bizarre, so utterly beyond the pale of human behavior that they would test his analytical powers as never before. The newspapers called it impossible, the police declared it insoluble, but to Dupin it was simply another puzzle waiting to be unraveled. And so begins our tale, not with fanfare or flourish, but with the quiet certainty of a mind prepared to confront the inconceivable. For in that dreadful apartment on the Rue Morgue, where 2 women met their ghastly end, Auguste Dupin would demonstrate for the first time that no mystery, however baffling, can withstand the relentless application of pure reason. The ghastly affair of the Rue Morgue first came to public attention through the morning editions of the newspapers. I remember distinctly how the thick black headlines screamed of horrors beyond comprehension. Atrocious murders in the Rue Morgue, 2 women savagely slain. The very typeface seemed to tremble with the shock of the revelation. At number 41 Rue Morgue, on the 4th floor of an otherwise respectable boarding house, Madame L'Espanaye and her daughter Camille had met their dreadful end. The concierge, upon hearing terrible screams at approximately 3 o'clock in the morning, had alerted several neighbors before summoning the police. When the officers forced entry, nearly an hour later, delayed by the apparent impossibility of opening the locked doors, they discovered a scene that would haunt even the most hardened investigators. The apartment presented a spectacle of devastation that defied all logic. Furniture lay shattered into kindling, A heavy bedstead broken to splinters, chairs reduced to fragments. In the center of this wreckage, the body of the younger woman, Mademoiselle Camille, was found thrust upside down into the narrow chimney flue, so violently wedged that it required 4 men to extract her. Her face and upper body bore terrible lacerations, as if some monstrous force had dragged her upward through the rough brick passage. But it was the condition of the elderly Madame L'Espanaye that truly turned strong men pale. She lay in the courtyard below, her neck so thoroughly severed that the head remained attached by mere shreds of flesh. The face was mutilated beyond recognition, deep gashes forming a grotesque pattern that suggested not mere murder, but some unspeakable ritual. Most horrifying of all, tufts of gray hair, torn violently from the scalp, were found clutched in her own stiffened fingers, as though she had ripped them out herself in her death agonies. The police investigation quickly descended into farce. Every theory proposed collapsed under scrutiny. The doors had been locked from within. The windows, though open, were utterly inaccessible from the street below. Neighbors testified to hearing 2 distinct voices during the attack, one unquestionably French, the other described variously as Spanish, Italian, or Russian by different witnesses. Most peculiar of all was the unanimous testimony regarding the shrill, unnatural quality of the French voice. "Not human," declared one witness. "Like nothing I've ever heard before," said another. The apartment's valuables remained untouched. Gold coins lay scattered on the floor, jewelry left in plain sight, yet nothing was taken. This eliminated robbery as a motive. The victims had no known enemies. Madame L'Espanaye was a recluse who lived solely for her daughter, while Camille's modest beauty had attracted no dangerous admirers. The coroner estimated the strength required to force Mademoiselle Camille up the chimney would have been superhuman, while the precision of Madame L'Espanaye's wounds suggested surgical skill. After 3 weeks of fruitless investigation, during which the newspapers daily invented new sensational theories, a secret lover, a political assassination, a madman escaped from Charenton, the prefect of police reluctantly admitted defeat. The case would join Paris's growing collection of unsolved mysteries, until Dupin, reading between the lines of the official reports, saw what others had missed. It was on a particularly gloomy afternoon, as rain lashed against our windows and the fire struggled to maintain its glow, that Dupin first expressed interest in the Rue Morgue atrocities. I had been reading aloud from the Gazette des Tribunaux, recounting the latest official statements about the case, when he suddenly raised a pale hand to silence me. "Read that section again," he commanded, his gray eyes gleaming with sudden intensity. "The part about the voices." I complied, rereading the testimony of the various witnesses who had heard the dreadful sounds from the murder apartment. When I finished, Dupin rose with unusual energy and began pacing before the fire, his shadow dancing grotesquely on the book-lined walls. "There is something here," he murmured, more to himself than to me, "something the fools have missed entirely." He stopped abruptly and fixed me with that penetrating gaze I had come to know so well. "We shall visit the Rue Morgue tomorrow." The following morning found us at the scene of the crime, Dupin having secured permission through channels I never fully understood. The apartment had been left largely undisturbed since the murders, a macabre museum of violence. Dupin moved through the rooms with the quiet intensity of a bloodhound, examining every detail, while I stood awkwardly near the door, unnerved by the lingering atmosphere of horror. For nearly 3 hours, he conducted his examination, at times crawling on hands and knees, at others, standing perfectly still for minutes at a time. He measured distances between objects, examined the angles of broken furniture, and even tasted, to my revulsion, some of the dried substances on the floor. The police had left chalk outlines where the bodies had been found. Dupin studied these with particular attention, frequently consulting a small notebook in which he made meticulous sketches. It was when he turned his attention to the windows that his investigation took its most dramatic turn. The apartment had 2 large casement windows opening onto the street below. These had been found open, but as they were nearly 20 feet above the pavement and lacked any nearby drain pipes or ledges, the police had dismissed them as possible points of entry or exit. Dupin, however, examined the windows with minute care. He tested their movement, measured their reach, and studied their fastenings. Suddenly, he gave a soft exclamation and beckoned me over. "Observe," he said, pointing to a small, almost imperceptible mark on the window latch. "Do you see it? The scratch here and the corresponding mark on the frame?" I confessed I could barely discern what he indicated. "Precisely," he cried, "which is why the police missed it entirely. These marks were made by a spring-loaded mechanism, a device designed to catch and hold when the window is closed with sufficient force. Our murderer entered and exited through this window." "But how?" I protested. "There's no possible way to reach it from outside." Dupin smiled enigmatically. "Come, we have seen enough here. There are other places I must examine." Our next stop was the morgue, where the bodies had been taken. Dupin spent nearly an hour examining the wounds, particularly those on Madame L'Espanaye's face and neck. He made careful notes about their shape, depth, and angle. The coroner, initially resistant to this civilian intrusion, became increasingly fascinated as Dupin pointed out details the professionals had overlooked. "The cuts on the neck," Dupin observed, "appear clean and precise at first glance, but notice how they actually consist of multiple overlapping strokes. The implement was extremely sharp, but wielded with remarkable irregularity, alternating between surgical precision and wild hacking. Most curious, equally intriguing to him, were the tufts of hair found in the old woman's hands. Under magnification, Dupin noted they had not been simply pulled out, but cut, and at different angles. She was not tearing out her own hair in anguish, he murmured, but having it cut from her head by something with unusual methods of holding scissors. Our final visit was to the newspaper offices, where Dupin pored through back issues, seeking any report of escaped animals or unusual thefts in the preceding months. It was here that he found what he later told me was the final piece of the puzzle, a small notice about a sailor from Malta who had reported the theft of an orangutan from his lodgings near the Rue Morgue. That evening, back in our rooms, Dupin sat smoking his meerschaum pipe, the blue wreaths of tobacco smoke curling about his head like the visible manifestations of his thoughts. At length, he laid out his conclusions with startling clarity. The murderer was not human, he stated calmly. It was an orangutan of the Bornean species, brought to Paris by a Maltese sailor. The creature escaped, entered through the window, which its remarkable agility allowed it to reach, and committed these atrocities with a razor it found in the apartment. I stared at him in utter disbelief, but he continued relentlessly, explaining each point with irrefutable logic. The superhuman strength needed to force the girl up the chimney, the inhuman quality of the voices reported, one being the sailor's, the other the ape's, the peculiar nature of the wounds matching an ape's use of tools, even the tufts of hair being cut by the razor rather than torn. "But how can you be certain of these details?" I stammered. Dupin smiled. "Because tomorrow we shall meet the sailor himself." The following morning, Dupin was unusually animated as he laid out his plan. "We must advertise," he declared, spreading open the pages of Le Monde, "but not in the usual fashion. Our notice must speak directly to our Maltese sailor without alerting others to our purpose." The advertisement he composed was a masterpiece of subtlety, found in the Bois de Boulogne. Early on the morning of the inquirent instanted, a very large orangutan of the Bornean breed. The owner, who is known to be a sailor belonging to a Maltese vessel, may have the animal again upon identifying it satisfactorily and paying a few charges connected with its capture and keeping. Apply at Rue au Troisième. Dupin explained his reasoning. The sailor will recognize his lost property, but the mention of the Bois de Boulogne, far from the Rue Morgue, will prevent any connection to the murders. The request for payment is crucial. It gives the appearance of legitimate business while ensuring his appearance. We took rooms under assumed names at the address given in the notice and waited. Dupin had arranged for 2 gendarmes to be stationed nearby, though they were instructed to remain out of sight unless summoned. He also secured a large net used by animal handlers, which we concealed behind a screen. 3 days passed without response, and I began to doubt the scheme. Then, on the 4th evening, just as dusk fell, we heard hesitant footsteps on the stairs. A knock followed, 3 quick raps, then 2 slower ones. Dupin motioned for me to remain silent as he opened the door. The man who stood there was exactly as he had predicted, a sailor of obvious Mediterranean origin, his skin weathered by tropical suns, his hands marked by rope burns. His eyes darted about nervously. "You have my ape?" he demanded, in heavily accented French. Dupin smiled pleasantly. "Come in, my friend. We have much to discuss." As the sailor stepped inside, Dupin quietly locked the door behind him and pocketed the key. What followed was one of the most extraordinary interrogations I have ever witnessed. Dupin began by showing the sailor a drawing he had made of an orangutan, watching carefully for recognition. When the man's eyes widened slightly, Dupin nodded. "You kept it in your lodgings near the Rue Morgue," he said conversationally. "A dangerous pet for a city dwelling." The sailor's face went ashen. "How do you know this?" Dupin ignored the question. "On the night of the murders, the beast escaped through your window, taking your razor with it. You gave chase, following it to the house where the women were killed." The sailor began to tremble violently. "I saw nothing. I heard screams, yes, but You heard," Dupin interrupted smoothly, "and you saw enough to know what had happened. Yet you did not come forward. Why? Because you feared being blamed for the murders yourself." With each statement, Dupin moved closer to the truth, presenting facts as if he had witnessed the events himself. The sailor, overwhelmed by this display of omniscience, collapsed into a chair. "God help me," he whispered. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Dupin's manner softened slightly. "Tell us everything, and you have my word you will not be charged with the murders, but you must leave Paris tonight, and that animal must never again be brought to civilization." What emerged was a tale both pitiable and horrifying. The sailor, recently returned from Borneo, had brought the orangutan back as a curiosity. On the fateful night, the creature had become agitated by his attempts to shave it with the razor. In a frenzy, it had escaped through the window, with the sailor in pursuit. "I saw it climb to that apartment," the man confessed, tears streaming down his face. "I heard the women scream, but by the time I climbed up, it was too late. The old woman was already dead, and the young one," he shuddered. "The ape had her by the hair and was playing with the razor. When it saw me, it got frightened and shoved her up the chimney." Dupin nodded gravely. "And then?" "I chased it back to our rooms. It was covered in blood, still holding the razor. I managed to get it into its cage. The next day, I sold it to a menagerie outside the city." He looked up desperately. "I swear I didn't know those women. I never meant—" Dupin held up a hand. "We believe you, but you must leave France immediately. There is a ship sailing for Malta tomorrow at dawn. You will be on it." After obtaining a full written confession, which Dupin assured would remain sealed unless the man returned to Paris, we let the sailor go. The gendarmes, though clearly puzzled by these proceedings, honored their agreement to let him depart. When we were alone again, I turned to Dupin in amazement. "You're just letting him go?" Dupin lit his pipe calmly. "Justice has been served. The sailor is guilty of stupidity, not murder. The real killer, that unfortunate beast, is already imprisoned in a cage where it can do no further harm. As for the prefect and his men," he exhaled a smoke ring with satisfaction. "Let them puzzle over their unsolved case a while longer. It will do their brains good." As the embers in our fireplace dwindled to faint crimson glow, I found myself staring at Dupin in silent awe. The Rue Morgue affair had concluded with neither fanfare nor public resolution, yet its implications lingered like the tobacco smoke curling about our heads. "You've shown," I ventured at last, "that the boundary between man and beast is far thinner than we dare admit. That poor creature acted from instinct, yet produced horrors surpassing human malice." Dupin stirred from his reverie, his gray eyes catching the firelight. "More disturbing, perhaps, is how easily we dismiss what we cannot categorize. The police saw only impossibility where nature offered explanation. We cling to comfortable fictions rather than confront unsettling truths." He rose and moved to the window, where dawn's first light tinted the Parisian rooftops. A newspaper on the table caught his attention, a report about the mysterious disappearance of a young shopgirl named Marie Roget. And so, the case of the murders in the Rue Morgue is over, but Dupin's detective journey has just begun. Edgar Allan Poe didn't just create a mystery, He created a blueprint for every sleuth to come, from Sherlock Holmes to modern crime solvers. In our next episode, we will dive into The Mystery of Marie Roget, where Dupin tackles a crime without ever leaving his armchair. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell because you won't want to miss how the world's first detective cracks an unsolvable real-life murder.